There was a man named Bernal Diaz del Castillo, and he traveled through a lot of North America, which now is referred to as Mexico, and the American islands as well. In the year 1514, Bernal Diaz del Castillo left Castile in Spain for the American islands. He mentioned how they encountered bad storms on this trip, on his way there, and many of the crew had died of plague that put sores on their legs and gave them fevers. A lot of people died on the ship. Bernal Diaz said that they arrived in a place they referred to as Tierra Firma in the Americas. In some of their first days on the land, they witnessed the decapitation of Vasco Nunez de Balboa. And they're like, man, we just got here and they're cutting dudes' heads off already. Man, I can't believe I just got here and they're already cutting people's heads off. Did you see that?
Yeah.
They're cutting that dude's head off.
Yeah. They do that a lot around here.
Yeah, man. It's crazy. They didn't have enough employment, so the men with Bernal Diaz, about 110 of them, were allowed to go to Cuba, where Diego Velazquez was governor, and they could possibly find some work there. And when they arrived in Cuba, they were promised to obtain some natives, some Indians. And after the Indians were discharged, they would acquire them. But that never happened. After 3 years, Bernal Diaz said that none of the men received these Indians. And there were about 110 of us Spaniards, he said, and that they were in slight protest. They went to a man named Francisco Hernandez de Cordoba, who was a wealthy person that owned a lot of Indians and wealthy dude. And this Francisco was to take these men on voyages to discover new lands to where these men could find employment and get rich themselves if they could, possibly. So then they purchased a couple ships, while they were given a third ship by the governor Velazquez, who said that they were to invade the Guanajas Islands as payment, in which these islands are between Cuba and Honduras. But Velazquez then ordered these men to bring back 3 cargoes of these Indians for payment for the ship that he gave them. And he would use these Indians as slaves. But Bernal Diaz wrote that him and his men protested that God nor the king would want them to turn a free people into slaves. So then he said that Velazquez honored these protests and let them take the ship with provisions. They're like, you guys are some good people. You know what? Just take the boat. You know what? Here's some bread. Go buy yourself some bacon. They then gathered cassava bread and some pigs for food for the trip. Then they brought with them a priest that they found, and an accountant to keep track of them any minerals they might find, like gold and silver or whatever else. Bernal Diaz wrote about all this a few decades after it had happened, so some modern historians suggest that the story was not completely true, since Bartolomé de las Casas' sympathy for the Native Americans may have persuaded Bernal's writings later on in life, decades later. Or possibly he wanted to press the sovereign of Spain and be like, see how good of a person I am? So we don't really know. There were some secondhand accounts that they note that that these guys were all about conquest and gathering Indians for slaves. So we may never know the true intention beyond that. But we're just going over what Bernal Diaz had written. So they got on a ship and they head out. After, I think it was 24 days, they arrived at what they named Grand Cairo in the Yucatan. And it has been referenced to resemble Muslim occupation of Egypt, with pyramids that resemble those of Cairo, Egypt. Now, Egypt was conquered by the Muslims. If you remember my other videos, I think I mentioned that the Muslims were making their way throughout the world, basically. And the Muslims had defeated the Roman occupation of Egypt in the year 646 of the Common Era. I think Rome had Egypt for about 600 or 700 years. And then the Muslims showed up. And they're like, it's ours. So they took that. The Rashidun Caliphate was one of the first caliphs of Islamic Muhammad, in which they have been said to have been very fearful, very scary dudes, militarily strong people, group of people that succeeded conquest while acquiring slaves and riches. The Islamic military group conquered a wide area of 3 continents, including North Africa, Tunisia, Central Asia, Egypt, and other places. They were some mean dudes. Islamic forces, just like everyone else, fought each other, though. In the year 1252, the Mamluks conquered the Ayyubids in Egypt. And the Mamluks ruled Egypt until the year 1517, when it changed Islamic hands. The Mamluks were made up of manumitted slaves that still served under the master but were free people. The Mamluks defeated Christian crusades and they diverted Mongolian routes. They weren't a people to mess with. And if the Spanish referred to these natives in America as on the Yucatan as these Muslims, they could have been quite scared. They've been like, damn, we come up across some bad dudes here. Since most of these Christian people wanted to liberate a lot of the world from these Muslims that had conquered and subjugated most Christian lands. But anyways, some natives on hollowed out logs made their way to the ships, and they jumped aboard to greet the Spaniards in America. Some 30 or so Mayan, it doesn't write it here, but because he didn't know at the time, but they were Mayan Indians that jumped aboard the main ship, where Bernal Diaz, Castillo, witnessed. The Spaniards gave them bacon and cassandra bread. They also gave them each a necklace of glass beads. These natives wore an apron of cotton that hung halfway down to their knees that they called maltates, and a woman had some similar but covered their thighs instead, in which they called nagua. And eventually, the natives made their way back to land to return with more boats to take the Spaniards ashore. So the next day, the cazique came with 12 boats, with a number of rowers to take the Spaniards to land. Bernal Diaz remembers clearly the words that the cazique repeated to them, "Con escotach."
Con escotach.
What did he say?
Con escotach.
What did he say? What's that guy saying over there? I think he wants us to come to his house.
Con escotach. Con escotach.
I don't believe it. He's asking us, he's inviting us over to his house. Which meant, come see my house. When the Spaniards made it to land, they named the spot Punta de Cotoche, which is in reference to the words that were repeated to him. One of the first places that the Spaniards sighted was a place called Icab, in which which was a Mayan jurisdiction in what is now referred to as Mexico and the Yucatan. And to this day, there are still remains of the 16th century church called Boca Iglesia that the Spaniards planted there in the 16th century. But anyways, that's where they came to. So in regards to going on land with the Mayans, the captain of the Spanish ship called a sort of meeting with the group to be careful. He's like, guys, look out. I don't know these people. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they want. But just be careful. Grab some of your weapons. Don't grab everything. Just be careful. So they had this little meeting. And when they finally made it ashore, the captain drew another meeting with the Spaniards to be careful. And then they were reluctant to go to the Mayan town of Icab. But they eventually followed. Yet the cazique and the people were like, come on, man, it's fine. Just follow us. And according to Bernal Diaz, when they arrived to this mountainous zone, they were ambushed by the Mayans. The Mayans had shields, bows, slings, feathers in their hair, and all this kind of stuff. And then 15 of the Spaniards were shot by arrows that were flying through the air. And when the arrows were done flying, these natives proceeded to fight hand-to-hand combat. And after the Mayans seen the sharpness of the swords of the Spaniards, the Mayans started to give up. After about 15 of them lay dying on the floor, on the ground. So that's what happened quite quickly when Bernal Diaz made it to land with his people. Pretty crazy story. After the fighting had ceased, the Spaniards started to inspect the area. There were 3 religious centers made of stone that held idols made of clay. Bernal Diaz said that some of the idols look like devils, while others look like women, and in some shapes they found resembled the Mayans, causing horrible offenses. Bernal Diaz isn't very specific in what offenses this might be. I assume sexual idols, because if they were like offenses like of the Mayans killing people, I mean, he would note that. But if this is going to, if this writing is going to be seen by the King and Queen of Spain, then he didn't want to mention, like, they have pictures of them doing doggy style. I assume. Who knows? Then they found wooden boxes that held other types of things that were made of like some fish and other things. That they were carved out of something he referred to as inferior type of gold. So the Spaniards had two of the Indians that they brought with them from Cuba to take this cheap gold carvings back to the ship with them. And they tended to the wounds of their 15 men, and they all got back on their ship and headed westbound to find more land. They were pleased with what they found so far, even after they just kicked the ass of the Mayans. Then they robbed them of their gold carvings, and they're like, we're out of here. Thanks, guys. Thanks for showing up. So this is basically part of the Mexico video that I did last time, but it's a little bit more in depth of what happened. And the last writings were a general summary of what happened, written by the Aztec. And now this is Bernal Diaz writings of specifically what they did on their way to Mexico. So anyways, subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more of it, because I'm going to do another episode eventually. I'm going to cut this one short right here because nobody likes long videos. So you take this information, I digest it. Anyways, that's it. Adios.